Vienna, winter of 1683. Snow falls in exhausted spirals through the lamplight, each flake a small surrender to gravity's indifferent pull. In the shadow of the Hofburg Palace, where emperors once orchestrated the fate of nations, the cobblestones gleam wet and black beneath the weight of centuries. The air tastes of coal smoke and the lingering ghosts of ambition. Here, in these ancient corridors of power, the same human dramas played out that would later captivate a solitary observer centuries hence. Now drift forward across oceans and epochs to Los Angeles, 1998. In a modest apartment in Silver Lake, a man sits alone at a wooden desk, surrounded by towers of books that lean like weathered sentinels. The room smells of old paper and coffee grown cold, while outside, the eternal hum of traffic provides the city's restless heartbeat. This is Robert Greene, and he is excavating the archaeology of power, not because he possesses it, but because he has spent decades studying its absence in himself. You who lie there in the darkness, wrestling with thoughts that circle like vultures, you understand this feeling. The weight of being overlooked, the exhaustion of navigating a world that rewards the ruthless while you remain conscientious, paralyzed by your own integrity. Greene's work emerges not from cruelty, but from curiosity. The same restless curiosity that keeps you awake, analyzing conversations, replaying failures, seeking patterns in the chaos of human behavior. Tonight we will not sharpen swords, but lay them down. We will explore Greene's psychology of human nature, not to become manipulators, but to find solace in understanding. To discover that the game you're playing has ancient rules, and you are not alone in your struggle to decode them. Let the outside world fade into whispered irrelevance. We descend now into the architecture of human nature, so that your mind may finally rest in comprehension. The night becomes a merciless accountant, tallying your years against an invisible ledger of accomplishment. You lie there, suspended in the amber of your own anxiety, watching the digital clock mark time like a metronome of missed opportunities. Everyone else, it seems, received the blueprint for life, the clear instructions, the obvious next steps, the certainty that propels them forward while you remain adrift in the abyss of your own indecision. This suffocating sense of being perpetually behind, of watching life unfold for others while you remain in rehearsal, is not your personal failing. It is the wanderer's burden, and Robert Greene carried this weight for decades before transforming it into profound wisdom. Consider Greene not as the sage whose words now grace bestseller lists, but as a man approaching 40, standing in the rain outside yet another temporary job, collar turned up against the wind of his own uncertainty. Before the leather-bound acclaim, before the title of modern Machiavelli, he was a ghost haunting the periphery of his own existence. 50 jobs. 50 different attempts to fit into a world that seemed designed for others. Construction worker in Greece, where ancient stones mocked his modern confusion. Translator in Paris, converting other people's thoughts into meaning. Magazine editor in New York, polishing other writers' dreams while his own gathered dust. Each position was a doorway opened and then quietly closed behind him, not with dramatic failure, but with the mundane recognition that this, too, was not the answer. He was not lazy. He was not incapable. He was simply searching for something the world had no name for. Wandering through a landscape where all the maps were written in languages he couldn't quite speak. His family worried. He worried. The world whispered its quiet verdict: dilettante, drifter, disappointment. But within that ache, something else was forming. In offices and on film sets, in the corridors of temporary employment where masks slip and motives curdle, Greene watched. He noticed which people rose and which quietly disappeared. He observed who was loved, who was feared, who was tolerated, and who was sacrificed. While he felt powerless, he studied power not abstractly, but in the raw, uncomfortable theatre of daily life, where human nature reveals its eternal patterns. Your own history tells a similar story, doesn't it? The jobs that felt like costumes that didn't fit. The career paths that seemed right on paper, but felt suffocating in practice. The friends who settled into conventional lives while you remained restless, questioning, unable to commit to paths that felt like slow death. You have been told this is indecision, immaturity, fear of commitment. But what if your wandering was not aimless, but essential? A gathering of materials for a structure you cannot yet envision. Greene did not publish his first book until 38. 38 years of what the world called failure, of what your anxious mind catalogues as wasted time. But those years were not wasted. They were an education in human nature that no university could provide. Each failure was another page in the unwritten book forming inside him. Your current confusion is not evidence of inadequacy. It is preparation for understanding. The sleepless nights spent analyzing conversations, relationships, social dynamics, these are not symptoms of dysfunction, but signs of a mind gathering data, recognizing patterns, preparing for insights that arrive only after sufficient observation. So tonight, release the tension that comes from forcing timelines upon the river of your existence. Your wandering is not your weakness, it is your education, your apprenticeship in the architecture of human nature, your quiet winter before spring. The mind of the anxious is a restless archive, a library where the lights never dim and the cataloguing never ceases. You know this sanctuary well, the place where you retreat when the world grows quiet, where every conversation becomes a text to be analyzed, every glance a footnote requiring interpretation. Tonight, as you lie there replaying the day's interactions, dissecting the pause before someone answered your question, scrutinizing that moment when eyes met across a crowded room, understand that what you call overthinking is actually the same faculty that transformed Robert Greene from wanderer into sage. Your nocturnal excavations are not neurosis, but scholarship in its most primitive, essential form. Picture Greene in his monastic research phase, surrounded not by disciples but by towers of books that lean like weathered monuments to human folly. His desk disappears beneath index cards, each one capturing a fragment of behavioral pattern observed across centuries. Here, a notation about jealousy in the court of Versailles. There, an observation about flattery in ancient Rome. He was building what we might call the architecture of observation, a systematic framework for understanding the recurring themes that govern human interaction regardless of era or culture. His method was not intuitive but methodical, not inspired but patient. He trusted neither memory nor instinct. Only what could be documented, cross-referenced, verified across the vast span of recorded behavior. This is precisely the mechanism that keeps you suspended in wakefulness, analyzing why your colleague's tone shifted mid-conversation, wondering if that brief silence signaled disapproval or mere distraction. Your mind refuses to accept surface explanations. It demands to understand the hidden wiring, to map the invisible architecture of human exchange. The world pathologizes this hypervigilance, labels it anxiety, prescribes remedies to quiet the relentless analysis. But what if this inability to simply accept things at face value is not malfunction, but extraordinary perception operating at unprecedented resolution? Greene spent decades as professional outsider, watching more successful people navigate territories he felt excluded from. This exile was not punishment, but education. He noticed which behaviors generated loyalty and which bred resentment, observed how certain individuals could shift a room's entire atmosphere while others, equally capable, remained invisible. His social awkwardness became analytical advantage. Those who belong rarely study the rules, only those standing at the periphery must learn the game's hidden grammar. Your burden is that you possess this same terrible, wonderful instrument. What you experience as social anxiety is often high-definition perception, recognizing the performance aspect of human interaction that others navigate unconsciously. You hear the unspoken resentment in compliments, feel the shifting power dynamics in casual exchanges. This awareness makes authentic connection difficult because you cannot unsee the machinery, but it also grants you access to patterns that comfortable participants never question. Now imagine yourself stepping back from the stage where you've been fumbling for lines under harsh spotlights. Move instead into the theater's velvet shadows, taking your seat in the back row, where darkness offers sanctuary. From here, the drama continues with undiminished intensity, but it cannot wound you. You are no longer victim of these dynamics, but their chronicler, watching ancient patterns unfold with the detached curiosity of a scholar observing natural phenomena. Tonight, let this glass wall of observation slide gently into place. Rest now in your role as eternal student, safe in the fortress of understanding, drifting slowly towards sleep. There exists a particular species of shame that visits you in the sanctuary of solitude. The quiet guilt surrounding your fascination with understanding manipulation, deception, and the shadowed mechanics of human motivation. Perhaps you recognize this in the constellation of your search history. Articles on detecting lies nestled between productivity tips and meditation guides. Explorations of dark psychology hidden among your noble pursuits of self-improvement. You wonder what this curiosity reveals about your character, whether your attraction to Greene's unflinching examination of power dynamics marks you as somehow morally compromised. Tonight, let me offer you absolution. Your hunger for this forbidden knowledge is not evidence of corruption, but of wisdom earned through wounds. Not cynicism, but survival instinct honed by experience. Greene's work provokes visceral reactions precisely because it refuses to participate in civilization's comforting mythology. His books sit on shelves like grimoires of modern sorcery, whispered about with equal measures fascination and fear. Critics dismiss him as dangerous, accuse him of providing ammunition to narcissists, of teaching manipulation to those who would weaponize it. But listen beneath their moral outrage, and you hear the undertone of a wounded idealist documenting the storm rather than celebrating it. Greene writes not as predator, but as prey grown tired of being surprised by teeth. His cataloguing of betrayal, seduction, and power games reads less like victory songs for manipulators and more like weather reports written by someone caught too often without shelter. Your midnight anxieties about hidden agendas, your hypervigilant analysis of social interactions, your exhausting inability to accept surface explanations, These are not symptoms of paranoia, but evidence of pattern recognition operating at extraordinary resolution. You have been hurt before by trusting too easily, by assuming others operated within your ethical framework, by believing kindness would be reciprocated rather than exploited. The colleague who presented your ideas as their own while smiling warmly. The friend who quietly turned others against you through carefully planted seeds of doubt. The lover who drifted away without explanation, leaving you to excavate meaning from silence. These experiences taught your nervous system to scan for danger, to question motives, to search for the machinery beneath the performance. Greene's controversial honesty offers strange comfort by transforming your inchoate suspicions into named dynamics, your shapeless dread into articulated laws. When he explains that people are fundamentally self-interested, that generosity often masks calculation, that vulnerability invites exploitation, he validates what you already sense but have been taught to suppress. This confirmation is profoundly soothing because it means you are not paranoid for seeing what you see, not cynical for questioning what others accept without scrutiny. Your attraction to understanding these darker patterns is not the curiosity of a would-be villain, but the exhausted vigilance of someone seeking to transform mysterious wounds into comprehensible mechanisms. Tonight, release the shame surrounding your darker curiosities. Your clear sight is not character flaw, but survival wisdom. Not moral failing, but evidence of honesty in a world that rewards beautiful lies. The darkness you explore was always part of the human landscape. You are simply brave enough to study the shadows that others avert their eyes from, finding strange peace in truth's harsh but liberating light. There exists a particular species of bewilderment that visits those who committed the crime of competence, the quiet confusion of souls who believed with touching naivety that excellence would be rewarded rather than resented. You were taught the gentle fiction of meritocracy, weren't you? That if you simply worked harder, thought deeper, offered more, the world would eventually adjust itself around your integrity. Yet your experience tells a different story, written in the invisible ink of office politics and social hierarchies. You remember the meeting where your perfect solution was met not with gratitude, but with your supervisor's cold, unreadable stare. You recall the project where your efficiency somehow became evidence against you, where doing too well felt like a transgression you couldn't name. This is where Robert Greene's first law, never outshine the master, enters your consciousness like a bitter medicine that nonetheless heals. Your initial reaction might be revulsion, a flash of righteous anger at the suggestion that you should dim your light, hide your gifts beneath the suffocating blanket of strategic mediocrity. But tonight, let us reframe this ancient wisdom not as manipulation, but as emotional intelligence for the sensitive soul, not as capitulation, but as the art of survival in environments that punish brilliance when it threatens the fragile egos of those who hold your fate in their trembling hands. The truth Greene offers is both harsh and liberating. People, especially those above you in any hierarchy, are rarely as secure as they appear. Their sense of self often hangs by threads of applause, deference, and the comforting illusion of superiority. When you step into their presence radiating unfiltered competence, you do not inspire them, you trigger the primal defensive reflex of a creature whose territory feels threatened. The coldness you received was not a judgment of your work's quality, but an emotional physics reaction, the inevitable result of one gravitational force encountering another in too small a space. Understanding this offers strange, melancholic liberation. The friction you felt is not because you are broken, but because you are bioluminescent in a world that often fears the light. Your workplace presentations that were met with suspicious silence. Your innovations that were quietly absorbed into someone else's triumph. Your honest enthusiasm that was somehow interpreted as arrogance. These were not failures of character, but collisions with the invisible architecture of insecurity that governs human hierarchies. Greene's law grants you permission to engage in what we might call protective camouflage. This is not hiding your light, but conserving your fuel. Not permanent diminishment, but strategic hibernation until you reach terrain where your full spectrum can shine without inviting destruction. There is profound self-care in deciding to appear slightly less brilliant than you are, in allowing others their small, sad victories of feeling superior. You do not need their applause to validate your worth. You need only preserve your energy for battles that matter, for environments that can hold your gifts safely. Tonight, imagine yourself as that lighthouse whose beam can be adjusted, never extinguished, but directed where it serves rather than threatens. Rest now in the wisdom of strategic visibility, drifting slowly towards sleep in the sanctuary of your own undiminished worth. Safe in shadows that shelter rather than diminish. Peaceful in the knowledge that your light remains intact, waiting for dawn. The world demands your voice like a relentless creditor demanding payment, doesn't it? Every notification a summons, every pause in conversation an obligation to fill with sound. Every silence you maintain interpreted as absence rather than sanctuary. You exhaust yourself explaining, justifying, performing the elaborate theatre of communication that modern existence requires. Your thoughts must be translated into responses, your boundaries defended with dissertations, your very presence validated through constant broadcast of opinion and reaction. By the time darkness arrives, your voice, that instrument you've been wielding all day like a weapon of self-defense, feels worn to translucent fragility, and your mind continues the performance long after your mouth has closed. There exists a particular species of exhaustion that visits those who have learned, through painful experience, that honesty can become a weapon in the wrong hands. You remember the moment you opened your heart in trust, only to have your vulnerability dissected later in whispers. The late-night message you sent explaining your anxiety met the next day with distance and polite discomfort. Each word you offered became a thread others could pull, unraveling the carefully woven fabric of your mystery until you stood exposed, predictable, diminished by interpretation. You learned that oversharing does not always bring intimacy, it often invites intrusion. And the more you reveal, the more raw material you provide for others to shape their own narratives about you. Robert Greene's law, always say less than necessary, offers profound liberation when transformed from tactical advantage into spiritual retreat. Consider the sheer caloric cost of constant communication, the mental energy burned in crafting perfect responses. The emotional labor of managing how your words land in the consciousness of others. When you speak unnecessarily, you are not offering generosity but bleeding energy into a void that can never be filled. Tonight, we reclaim silence not as withholding, but as the ultimate act of self-preservation. The gentle return to your own interiority where no performance is required. Imagine now constructing a fortress of silence around your thoughts. Walls built not of cold stone but of strategic quiet. high enough to absorb the noise of external demands, yet welcoming enough to shelter your most fragile contemplations. Inside these walls, you need not justify, defend, or translate every feeling into acceptable language. Your inner world becomes a sanctuary, where the only voice that matters is the quiet rhythm of your own breath, where you may think without turning every thought into a statement, feel without converting every emotion into content for others to consume. This fortress grants you exquisite permission. You do not owe the world your immediate reaction, your constant availability, your endless explanations. You are allowed your secrets, your mysteries, your right to let people misunderstand you, because their understanding is not required for your peace. When pressure arrives to explain your choices, you simply observe the pressure without surrendering to it, watching it break like waves against the shore of your quiet refusal. Tonight, feel your jaw unclench as you release the burden of speech. Let the drawbridge of your fortress rise, sealing you safely within walls where no words are required. Here in the gathering darkness, you exist without description, complete and whole in the sanctuary of your own unspoken depths, drifting slowly toward the wordless country of sleep, where silence reigns eternal and explanation becomes unnecessary. Envy arrives at night like a fever that refuses to break, doesn't it? The modern altar glows before you, that cold rectangle of blue phosphorescence that transforms your bedroom into a cathedral of comparison. With each upward swipe of your thumb, entire worlds of curated perfection unfold, vacations bathed in golden light, promotions wrapped in humble gratitude, relationships that appear immune to the fractures and silences that define your own existence. Each image lands like a small stone in your chest, accumulating weight until breathing becomes an exercise in endurance, until your own life feels like a rough draft surrounded by published masterpieces. This is the particular torture Robert Greene understood with brutal clarity, not as victim, but as scholar of his own wounds. For decades, he watched success arrive for others while he remained in the wings, cataloguing his inadequacy against the highlight reels of peers who seemed to navigate existence with effortless grace. What he discovered through this painful observation is that envy operates as a mechanical flaw in human perception, a glitch in our social software that compares our behind-the-scenes chaos to everyone else's carefully edited performance. You are measuring your internal turbulence, the 3am panic, the career confusion, the relationship doubts, against their external composure, mistaking their performance for their reality. Greene's genius lies in recognizing envy not as moral failing, but as diagnostic instrument, a compass pointing toward unacknowledged desires distorted by the lens of insecurity. When you envy someone's promotion, you are not truly seeing their success. You are projecting your own hunger for recognition onto the screen called other people. You imagine their achievement has inoculated them against the very anxieties that plague you, that their external validation has solved the fundamental human terror of not being enough. This is the great illusion that keeps you scrolling in the darkness, feeding the fever that refuses to break. But consider the person whose career trajectory fills you with acidic longing. They are lying awake at different hours, haunted by different inadequacies, convinced that you possess some essential quality they lack. The couple whose relationship appears woven from pure contentment, they have arguments in parking lots and silences that stretch for days, moments of contempt they would never photograph. Everyone is performing the exhausting theatre of image management, editing their chaos into acceptable narratives. The more perfect the presentation, often the more chaotic the reality it conceals. Greene's antidote emerges from this recognition. You cannot poison yourself with false information and expect to heal. Tonight we dismantle the pedestals upon which you have placed these strangers and acquaintances, revealing them as fellow travelers struggling with customized versions of the same fundamental confusion. Your envy dissolves when you understand that everyone is engaged in the same desperate performance, that their curated victories are no more real than movie sets designed to suggest lives they do not actually live. The relief you seek will not come from finally achieving what they appear to possess, but from practicing the radical art of looking away, not from bitterness, but from recognition that their journey has nothing to do with yours. Imagine retracting the energy tentacles you have sent into their lives, pulling your attention back like fishing lines from empty waters. Feel the profound rest that comes from resigning from a competition you never agreed to enter, returning to the only terrain that matters, your own unfinished, incomparable story, drifting slowly towards sleep in the quiet sanctuary of enough. There exists a particular violence in your resistance to forces beyond your control, a specific exhaustion that comes from standing in the rushing current of events with arms outstretched, believing you can redirect the flow through sheer determination. You know this posture intimately, the perpetual tension in your shoulders, the shallow breath of someone braced for impact. The mind that races through scenarios like a general plotting against enemies that exist only in the theatre of possibility. The deadline approaching like storm clouds. The relationship slowly unraveling despite your desperate attempts to hold the threads together. The economic uncertainties that no amount of midnight calculation can solve. You have been fighting currents stronger than yourself, and by nightfall you are not merely tired but eroded, worn smooth by the friction of futile resistance. Robert Greene, in his archaeological study of power across centuries, recognized a paradox that the anxious mind resists with every fiber. True strength often emerges not from confrontation, but from the subtle art of strategic surrender. He observed the same tragic pattern repeating throughout history, rulers exhausting their kingdoms fighting tides they could never command. Fortunes lost resisting inevitable change, lives squandered defending positions already doomed by deeper currents. The stone that resists the river is eventually ground to sand. The water that yields to the riverbed finds its way through surrender to gravity's patient pull. Your insomnia often stems from this fundamental misunderstanding, the belief that sufficient worry can somehow transmute into control, that if you simply think hard enough, plan thoroughly enough, rehearse meticulously enough, you can alter outcomes that were never yours to determine. The colleague who dislikes you will not transform through your midnight analysis. The project's success depends on variables beyond your influence, regardless of how many times you replay your presentation in the sleepless hours. The loved one drifting away has made calculations in their own private arithmetic that your devotion cannot revise. Consider the swimmer caught in a rip current, the perfect metaphor for your current predicament. Panic dictates swimming directly toward shore, thrashing against the tide's overwhelming force. This is how drowning happens, not from the water itself, but from exhaustion born of fighting the ocean's fundamental nature. Survival requires detachment. Stop struggling, float, allow the current to carry you parallel to shore until its power dissipates. Then return to safety with strength intact. Your anxiety is that panicked swimmer, convinced that stopping the mental thrashing means being swept into oblivion. Tonight, we practice the profound art of stepping from the current to the riverbank, becoming observer rather than combatant in your life's turbulence. The events of tomorrow will unfold regardless of your vigilance. Others' decisions will crystallize whether you worry or not. The vast machinery of circumstance operates with complete indifference to your midnight interventions. Visualize these forces as a dark river carrying debris, deadlines, conflicts, uncertainties past your position on the shore. Feel your fists unclenching now, your jaw releasing its perpetual tension. Your shoulders dropping from their defensive hover near your ears. Let the stream of events carry you gently through the darkness, no longer swimming against the tide, but floating weightless and unburdened. Trusting the current's ancient wisdom, drifting slowly toward the peaceful shores of sleep where control becomes unnecessary and surrender transforms into sanctuary. The anticipation arrives hours before the event itself, doesn't it? That peculiar dread that transforms ordinary gatherings into gladiatorial arenas, where you must perform the exhausting choreography of acceptability. You rehearse conversations in the mirror, calibrating your enthusiasm to avoid appearing desperate, your competence to prevent triggering envy, your vulnerability to sidestep those who weaponize weakness. Before you even cross the threshold, you are already depleted from the mental theater of social calculation. Already bracing for the 1,000 micro-adjustments required to navigate rooms filled with invisible tripwires and unspoken hierarchies. Robert Greene, through his archaeological study of charismatic figures across centuries, discovered a paradox that should offer your anxious mind profound relief. True magnetism rarely emerges from desperate projection, but from deliberate withholding. Not from the frantic noise of performance, but from the gravitational pull of centered intention.
The most compelling figures in history were seldom the loudest voices in their chambers. They were the ones who understood presence as curation rather than exhibition, who moved through social spaces like skilled directors rather than desperate actors auditioning for approval. Your social anxiety stems from a cruel misunderstanding, the belief that authenticity requires total transparency, that any selective revelation constitutes deception, that you must arrive emotionally naked to every interaction or risk being labeled fraudulent.
This impossible standard leaves you paralyzed at thresholds, rehearsing entrances, calculating the precise formula that will earn acceptance without inviting exploitation. But consider yourself not as a single fragile manuscript that must be read in its entirety, but as a vast library containing countless volumes. No visitor expects to absorb every book simultaneously. They browse thoughtfully, selecting what serves their current need, appreciating depth without demanding exhaustive revelation. Greene observed that magnetic individuals operate like constellations, multifaceted beings who choose which stars to illuminate in different contexts. With intimate friends, you might reveal your anxious questioning. In professional settings, your analytical precision. In casual encounters, perhaps only your capacity for attentive listening. Nothing about this selective emphasis constitutes falsehood. It represents intelligent adaptation. The same way a museum displays certain masterpieces while keeping others in climate-controlled storage. Not because the stored works lack value, but because thoughtful presentation requires intentional choices about revelation and timing. Tonight, imagine yourself stepping away from the exhausting role of social accommodator, that desperate performer who contorts to fit every expectation. Instead, envision yourself as the theatre's director, making deliberate choices about lighting and staging. You decide which aspects of your complex nature serve the current scene. You are allowed your mystery, your right to remain partially unknown, your permission to let others wonder rather than explaining every thought. Greene understood that curiosity is more compelling than complete transparency, that strategic silence creates vacuum others naturally move toward filling.
Feel the profound relief of releasing the fiction that you must be uniformly yourself across all contexts, that every interaction requires your complete emotional inventory. You are not hiding, you are honoring the sacred art of appropriate revelation. Rest now in the knowledge that presence requires not extraordinary qualities but intentional choices, not desperate performance but centered inhabitation of your own authentic complexity, drifting slowly towards sleep where all audiences dissolve and the only role required is the gentle rhythm of
existing peacefully in your own unobserved company. The path to any form of depth is lined with empty chairs, isn't it? There exists a particular hollow silence that accompanies your evenings alone, not the comfortable solitude of chosen rest, but the sharp awareness that while others populate their feeds with group photographs and weekend gatherings, you sit illuminated only by the cold glow of your work, your books, your quiet obsessions that cannot be explained at dinner parties without watching eyes glaze with polite incomprehension. You have been told this isolation is unhealthy, that your preference for deep engagement over shallow connection signals some fundamental maladjustment. The world whispers its verdict: lonely, antisocial, missing the essential experiences that make life worth living. Robert Greene's exploration of mastery offers unexpected absolution for your hermit tendencies, reframing this loneliness not as punishment but as prerequisite, the necessary incubation chamber where ordinary competence transforms into extraordinary capability. He documented what he called the apprenticeship phase, a pattern that repeats across centuries and disciplines. Every individual who achieved profound mastery passed through an extended period of misunderstood exile. Da Vinci withdrawing to his workshop while contemporaries built social capital. Darwin spending years in solitary observation before revealing his revolutionary insights. The mathematician losing friends while wrestling with proofs that would reshape human understanding. To bystanders, these figures appeared obsessive, perhaps even tragic. Only in retrospect did their isolation acquire the dignified title of dedication. Your current separation from the warm blur of collective noise is not failure but apprenticeship. Not loneliness, but the cocoon stage where transformation occurs in darkness and silence. The world rewards swift, superficial participation, the quick reply, the immediate post, the constant availability that signals conformity. But mastery operates on geological time, requiring depths of focus that cannot survive constant interruption. While others are building networks, you are building capacity. While they are maintaining appearances, you are developing substance. These are not equivalent activities, and they cannot coexist in equal measure. Time is finite, and depth requires the hours that breadth consumes. Greene understood that comparing your solitary progress to others' social abundance creates a false equivalency, like measuring a novel's worth by counting the author's party invitations. Your friends who seem effortlessly connected often operate at surfaces you have already outgrown. Their ease comes from accepting conventions you cannot help but question, from inhabiting roles you find suffocating. They are not happier than you, they are simply playing a different game with different rules and different rewards. Your inability to sustain interest in small talk and status updates is not social dysfunction, but evidence of a mind that requires more substantial nourishment. The isolation that keeps you awake with worry is actually the only environment where your authentic voice can develop, unpolluted by the chorus of consensus. What feels like exile is simply the quiet required for your mind to weave complex tapestries of understanding that cannot be formed in the noise of the marketplace. The discomfort you feel is the friction of separation, the necessary tearing away from collective mediocrity to forge something singular and enduring. You are not being left behind. You are simply traveling through different terrain, walking a path that diverges from the well-traveled roads where others gather. Tonight, rather than condemning your loneliness as evidence of deficiency, consider it the dignified solitude of the apprentice. Your solitude is not permanent abandonment, but temporary apprenticeship. Not emptiness, but the fertile soil from which your future mastery will eventually bloom. Let the silence of your room become not an absence of company, but a presence of potential. A sacred space where the alchemy of transformation takes place. Rest now in this worn but faithful cloak of chosen isolation, drifting slowly towards sleep in the quiet company of your own becoming. Peaceful in the knowledge that your hermit season is not punishment, but preparation for depths others cannot yet imagine. You have been conscripted into a mythology of perpetual combat, haven't you? Raised on the beautiful lie that surrender signals weakness, that every provocation deserves your full arsenal, that walking away from any battle constitutes moral failure. This cultural programming has colonized your nervous system, transforming ordinary existence into exhausting warfare, where every email demands immediate counter-offensive, every slight requires elaborate defense, every challenge must be met with the full weight of your diminishing resources. By nightfall, you suffer from a particular species of fatigue that sleep cannot cure. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has spent years trying to prove to everyone and everything that they are enough. Robert Greene, through his archaeological study of power across military campaigns and political dynasties, recognized a pattern that your anxious mind desperately needs to absorb. The greatest strategists throughout history understood that knowing when not to fight often determined survival more than knowing how to win. Alexander the Great withdrew from battles he could not afford to lose. Napoleon's most fatal error was refusing retreat from Moscow. The samurai who survived longest were not the most aggressive, but those who recognized which conflicts served their ultimate purpose, and which merely satisfied ego's desperate hunger for vindication. History is littered with the wreckage of armies that refused to withdraw from untenable positions, leaders who squandered their resources defending hills that held no strategic value. Your burnout emerges from fighting on too many fronts simultaneously: workplace dysfunction, family expectations, social obligations, and your own internal critic, all while maintaining the facade of effortless competence. You have mistaken relentless involvement for responsibility, constant engagement for virtue. Every conflict feels urgent, every misunderstanding requires an essay of explanation. You rush to clarify, to correct, to smooth, believing that if you do not intervene, everything will collapse. But consider the caloric cost of this constant combat. The mental energy consumed drafting perfect rebuttals to criticisms that will be forgotten by morning. the emotional reserves depleted, defending yourself to someone whose opinion carries no actual weight in your life's trajectory. Greene's wisdom invites you to survey your battlefield with cold, compassionate clarity. That colleague who consistently misinterprets your intentions? You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to someone determined to misunderstand. The family member who reliably triggers your defensive patterns? You can choose silence over the exhausting performance of justification. The project demanding resources you cannot afford to give? Sometimes the wisest response is gentle but firm withdrawal. This is not weakness, but sophisticated resource management. The mature recognition that your energy is finite and precious, that some victories cost more than they are worth. Tonight, imagine yourself as a general surveying the landscape of your commitments and conflicts at twilight. One by one, begin dimming the lights over unnecessary fronts. Feel the profound relief of letting certain battles simply end through your absence. Allowing others their small victories if it means preserving your strength for campaigns that align with your actual values rather than conditioned reflexes. Your breath becomes a white flag to the world's incessant demands, not in defeat, but in wisdom. Rest now in the sanctuary of strategic withdrawal, drifting slowly towards sleep with your reserves intact. Peaceful in the knowledge that tomorrow's battles will be chosen deliberately, fought on ground of your own choosing. There exists a particular species of midnight self-prosecution that visits when your emotions refuse to submit to the tribunal of logic. You wake enveloped in causeless dread, your chest constricted by anxiety that defies inventory of your circumstances. The sadness that descends during ordinary afternoons offers no reasonable explanation for its arrival, resistant to the rational voice cataloguing your blessings like evidence in a case for gratitude. When anger flares at minor provocations, the delayed email, the misplaced keys, the colleague's thoughtless comment, you judge this disproportionate response as shameful evidence of some fundamental instability that must be concealed from others who appear to navigate their emotional weather with elegant, unwavering consistency. Robert Greene, in his archaeological study of human nature, offers a perspective that should revolutionize your relationship with these internal storms. His central premise contradicts everything your anxious mind believes about proper emotional management. You are not primarily a rational creature, occasionally disrupted by feeling, but fundamentally an emotional organism who sometimes achieves the luxury of logical thought. Your prefrontal cortex, that thin veneer of analysis you mistake for your entire identity, sits precariously atop ancient limbic structures designed not for spreadsheets and strategic planning, but for survival in environments where hesitation meant death and intuition meant preservation of your genetic lineage. The relief Greene provides is permission to cease this exhausting war against your own neurochemistry. When anxiety arrives unbidden, it emerges not from failure to think correctly, but because your amygdala has detected patterns it interprets as threat. Patterns shaped by evolutionary pressures that prioritized survival over comfort, hypervigilance over serenity. Your depression may reflect not moral inadequacy, but the downstream effects of disrupted circadian rhythms, nutritional deficiencies, seasonal light changes, or the accumulated stress of navigating social structures your nervous system was never designed to comprehend. These biological realities do not respond to self-criticism, they simply exist, like atmospheric pressure or gravitational pull. Consider yourself not as a unified consciousness that should maintain perfect emotional equilibrium, but as an ancient mountain experiencing atmospheric conditions beyond its control. Storms gather and disperse across your peaks without requiring permission from the stone itself. Rain falls, fog obscures familiar valleys, sunshine eventually returns. None of this reflects the mountain's character or represents geological failure. Your emotions are weather systems moving through the topography of your being, influenced by factors as varied as last night's sleep debt, this morning's blood sugar fluctuations, subtle hormonal tides, and the microscopic stresses your conscious mind dismisses as insignificant, but your nervous system accumulates like sediment. Greene understood that accepting your irrational nature paradoxically grants more agency than fighting it. When you stop demanding that every feeling justify itself through logical narrative, you can simply observe, melancholy visits today. How curious. Not why am I sad? What's wrong with me? I shouldn't feel this way. This shift from prosecutor to witness creates psychological space where emotions can exist without consuming your entire identity. You are not your anxiety. You are the awareness noticing anxiety's temporary residence, the mountain observing clouds rather than becoming them. Tonight, imagine these feelings as ancient relatives arriving unannounced at your estate. They require no entertainment, no explanation, no apology for their presence. Simply acknowledge their arrival, offer them space to exist, and trust they will depart when their mysterious business concludes. Rest now in the profound forgiveness of your own biological nature, drifting slowly towards sleep, where logic dissolves into wordless dark, peaceful in the knowledge that feeling is not failing, that the mountain endures long after every storm passes into memory. There is a particular hour of the night, usually when the world has grown still enough for you to hear the refrigerator hum and the house settle into its bones, when the thoughts you spend your daylight hours suppressing slip through the cracks of your exhaustion like smoke seeping under a locked door. They arrive uninvited, flashes of envy so corrosive you imagine celebrating a friend's failure. Sudden bursts of rage that paint vivid scenarios of revenge against minor slights. Cold calculations about how to wound someone who wounded you, or strange primitive fears that seem to belong to a more savage version of yourself. Your conscious mind recoils in horror, immediately launching the familiar prosecution. This isn't me. I am kind. I am evolved. Good people don't think such things. And so begins the secret war that exhausts you more than any external battle. The relentless campaign to exile these dark impulses from your self-concept, terrified that their mere existence reveals some fundamental corruption lurking beneath your carefully maintained facade of decency. You spend precious energy wrestling these shadows back into the psychological basement, serving simultaneously as prosecutor, defendant, and judge in an internal trial that prevents the very rest your fractured psyche desperately requires. Robert Greene, drawing from the revolutionary depths of Carl Jung's psychology, confronts this midnight battlefield with unsettling compassion. Jung called it the shadow, not a monster requiring slaughter, but the repository of everything civilization forced you to amputate in order to become acceptable. When you were small and vulnerable, you learned with survival-level urgency which aspects of yourself earned love and which triggered withdrawal. Your raw aggression, your unfiltered selfishness, your authentic desires for power and recognition, these were systematically exiled into the unconscious to ensure your place in the family, the classroom, the tribe. But nothing in the psyche truly dies. It merely retreats into darkness, growing denser and more insistent the longer it remains unacknowledged. Greene understood what Jung discovered through decades of clinical observation. Individuals who present themselves as uniformly virtuous, who claim to have transcended all selfish impulses and aggressive tendencies, are not evolved but dissociated, having buried their shadow so deeply it operates autonomously, erupting in unexpected self-sabotage, projection onto others, or the peculiar cruelty of those convinced of their own righteousness. The energy you expend maintaining the persona of perpetual goodness, always accommodating, never angry, eternally understanding, is immense. You become a guard maintaining vigilant watch over a prison you built for yourself, exhausted by the constant patrol of your own psychological borders. Your anxiety often intensifies precisely when these exiled fragments press against consciousness, seeking integration. The disproportionate rage you feel toward others' selfishness often conceals the fact that you, too, hunger to prioritize your needs, but forbid yourself the right. The discomfort you experience around certain people frequently mirrors disowned traits you unconsciously recognize in yourself. Each nocturnal spiral, how could I think that? What is wrong with me? Tightens the noose, transforming natural psychological complexity into evidence of moral failure requiring constant suppression. Greene offers a gentler, more terrifying invitation. Instead of continuing this inquisition, what if you simply turned toward the shadow and listened, not to obey every dark impulse, but to understand what your exiled aspects are attempting to communicate? Your jealousy might reveal where you have abandoned authentic desires. Your rage might signal boundaries repeatedly violated. Your fantasies of escape could expose the suffocating weight of roles you never consciously chose. The shadow, viewed through this lens, becomes less a demon beneath the bed and more a neglected child locked in the basement, loud, disruptive, sometimes vicious, but only because it has been denied acknowledgement, language, and light. Tonight, we practice the radical act of psychological hospitality. When the thought arrives that you wish someone would simply disappear from your life, rather than prosecuting yourself for this darkness, simply observe, there is my capacity for ruthlessness. How interesting. When envy visits your consciousness, acknowledge, here resides my hunger for recognition and success. I see you. This is not permission to enact every impulse, but recognition that containing these capacities does not make you monstrous. It makes you complete, fully human, rather than a sanitized performance of who you believe you should be. Imagine now these shadow fragments as ancient relatives arriving unannounced at your estate, your inner aggression, your capacity for selfishness, your potential for cruelty. They require no entertainment, no justification, no apology for their presence. Simply acknowledge their arrival, offer them space to exist within your awareness, and notice how they lose their terrifying charge the moment you stop fighting their existence. They transform from demons threatening possession into simply old, wounded parts of yourself asking for a seat at the table of your consciousness. In this integration lies profound relief, the end of the civil war that has been fragmenting your energy for years. You no longer need to spend your nights patrolling the borders of your own mind, no longer exhaust yourself maintaining the fiction of uniform goodness. Rest now in the complete acceptance of your total humanity, drifting slowly towards sleep where all aspects of yourself can finally coexist in the dark sanctuary of wholeness. Peaceful in the knowledge that your darkness is not your enemy but your teacher, your completeness, your truth made visible in the forgiving shadows of night. There exists a suffocating intimacy to your problems at night, doesn't there? They press against your consciousness like fabric too close to breathe through, expanding until they occupy your entire horizon. The awkward conversation from yesterday replays in merciless high definition. The upcoming deadline looms like an inescapable execution date. The financial worry swells until it devours your entire future, leaving no oxygen for hope. In the claustrophobic theatre of your bedroom, these concerns are not merely events, they are totalizing realities that seem to define the very boundaries of your existence. Robert Greene, in his archaeological study of power across centuries, discovered a profound pattern that should revolutionize your relationship with personal crisis. The disasters that once seemed world-ending now survive only as footnotes in forgotten chapters. Empires that felt eternal crumbled into archaeological sites. The scandals that consumed entire courts have evaporated into irrelevance. Monarchs who once despaired over lost battles are now reduced to single sentences in dusty textbooks. What felt absolute within its moment became almost invisible when viewed from sufficient temporal distance. Tonight, we borrow Greene's long lens and perform a radical act of perspective. Imagine your consciousness detaching gently from your physical form, rising through the ceiling of your room where you lie suspended in worry. From this height, your anxieties remain visible but smaller, contained within walls of a single structure among thousands. Continue ascending with cinematic precision. Your neighborhood becomes a grid of lights, each illuminated window housing its own universe of midnight prosecution. The colleague whose confidence unsettles you lies awake in one of those distant rectangles, fearing exposure as an imposter. Rise higher still until cities contract into clusters of luminescence, highways into golden veins threading through darkness. From the stratosphere there is no promotion, no humiliation, no unread notification. Only a small blue planet turning quietly through impassive void. The office where you experience such shame becomes invisible. The apartment where you wept over heartbreak is indistinguishable from countless others where similar sorrows played out decades ago and will play out decades hence. Now drift further into the cold, clear vacuum of space until Earth hangs before you. A fragile marble suspended in infinite silence. Here, against the backdrop of galaxies spinning in slow motion across distances the human mind cannot comprehend, your entire life occupies less than a blink in the eye of the cosmos. The email that terrified you this afternoon cannot be detected from this altitude. The social rejection that felt like death is meaningless against the eternal dance of celestial mechanics. This cosmic indifference is not cold, but strangely warming, like a blanket woven from threads of insignificance. If nothing lasts, then your mistakes don't last either. The universe is not conspiring against you, it is simply continuing its magnificent, indifferent unfolding. Your problems are not unique catastrophes, but tiny ripples in a vast ocean that has absorbed billions of such ripples before you and will absorb billions more after you are forgotten. Feel the profound liberation that comes with accepting your smallness. You are free. Free from the exhausting burden of self-importance. Free from the belief that the universe watches your performance with critical eyes. It is not watching. It is simply being. Rest now in the warm embrace of your own cosmic insignificance, drifting slowly back down to your bed, carrying the quiet knowledge that you are safe within the infinite, held by forces far greater than your worries, peaceful in the vast, silent dark, where all anxiety dissolves into the gentle rhythm of sleep. There exists a particular exhaustion that no amount of physical rest can touch. The bone-deep weariness that comes from spending every waking moment as the architect, contractor, and security guard of your own identity. From the moment consciousness flickers awake, you begin the familiar reconstruction, assembling the professional mask, polishing the social persona, reinforcing the carefully maintained narrative of who you are and why you matter. This invisible armor, forged from accumulated achievements and defended reputations, grows heavier with each passing hour until, by nightfall, you can barely breathe beneath its weight. Yet still, you clutch these constructed walls around yourself, terrified of what might remain if you allowed them to crumble. Robert Greene, in his archaeological study of power across centuries, documented the same tragic pattern repeating like a broken record through history. The most tormented figures were invariably those most desperate to preserve their image. Roman senators who chose suicide over the loss of status. Medieval knights who died defending titles that would be forgotten within a generation. Modern executives who destroyed their health protecting reputations already crumbling in boardrooms they would never see again. Greene recognized that the ego, that vigilant sentry standing guard over your sense of self, operates like a hungry ghost, perpetually unsatisfied, demanding constant validation to confirm its existence while consuming the very peace it claims to protect. Your sleepless nights are often the ego's desperate vigil, replaying conversations to protect an image, rehearsing tomorrow's performances to maintain the fiction of competence, defending against imagined attacks on a self that exists primarily in your own anxious imagination. This construct interprets every silence as potential rejection, every criticism as existential threat, every moment of not being actively praised as evidence of impending social annihilation. It is a tyrannical ruler that never rests, never feels secure, never allows you the luxury of simply existing without justification. But Greene's deepest wisdom emerges from the ancient practice of memento mori, remember you must die, reframed not as morbid obsession, but as the most liberating recognition available to human consciousness. If nothing about your carefully constructed identity survives the patient erosion of time, then the mistakes keeping you awake tonight carry no permanent weight. The professional humiliation that feels so devastating, it will dissolve into irrelevance along with the company, the industry, the entire economic system it occurred within. The social embarrassment that haunts your midnight hours, the witnesses will forget, then age, then die, taking your shame with them into oblivion. Tonight, we engage in the gentle art of systematic dissolution. Not through force, but through recognition of what was always temporary. Begin with your professional identity. Whatever title appears on your business card, whatever role defines your days. Feel this constructed self like a heavy coat you've been wearing so long you forgot it wasn't part of your skin. Now imagine slowly unbuttoning this coat, letting it slide from your shoulders, watching it dissolve like sugar in warm water. You are not your job. You are not your productivity. You are not your success or failure. Beneath the performance of competence lies something far more resilient. something that existed before your first paycheck and will continue long after your last performance review. Continue this dissolution with your social identity. The friend who always listens, the partner who never complains, the family member playing assigned roles in other people's narratives. These relationships are real and precious, but they are not the totality of your being. Imagine these social connections as threads connecting you to others, and now visualize those threads gently detaching, not through cruelty, but through recognition that you are complete without external validation, whole without constant reinforcement of your relational worth. Now we move deeper into the realm of pure imagery. Picture yourself lying in a shallow, clear stream where the water moves with ancient patience. In your hands, you hold a piece of paper where your name is written in heavy black ink. Not just your given name, but all the labels you use to define yourself. Successful, failure, anxious, strong, broken, whole. Feel your fingers relaxing, releasing this paper into the gentle current. Watch as the water saturates the page, the ink beginning to bleed and blur. The letters of your identity dissolving into dark swirls that drift downstream until the paper becomes blank, white, innocent of all description. One by one, take the heavy stones you've been carrying in an invisible backpack, each one carved with a different aspect of your constructed self. Senior manager sinks with a muffled splash. Disappointment disappears into the silt. The one who has it together dissolves before it reaches the bottom. Feel the incredible lightness returning to your shoulders as the burden of definition falls away. You do not need to be anyone right now. You do not need to justify your existence to the darkness. The ego fights this dissolution with its familiar whispers. Without these labels, you are nothing. Without this identity, you don't exist. Without this performance, no one will love you. But as the last stone of self-definition sinks into the stream's forgiving depths, you discover the opposite truth. Beneath the exhausting noise of identity lies something far more vast and peaceful. Pure awareness. The consciousness that remains when the story finally stops. You are the breath moving in and out of the body without requiring permission. You are the darkness behind closed eyes that needs no explanation. You are the silence between thoughts that has always been your truest home. In this space of no self, there is no one to be anxious, no one to be judged. No one to maintain the exhausting performance of being somebody special. There is only the gentle hum of existence, unburdened by the need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. The you who worried about tomorrow's meeting has dissolved. The you who replayed today's awkward conversation has evaporated. What remains is something unnamed and unnameable, something that was never born and will never die. Something that rests in the infinite space between one breath and the next. Rest now in this beautiful annihilation, drifting deeper into the velvet void where the exhausted ego finally releases its death grip on control. You are safe in the absence of yourself, free at last from the prison of self-importance, dissolving slowly into the wordless dark, where all identities merge into the same peaceful nothingness. The same eternal sleep where you are finally, completely, no one and everyone, all at once in the quiet. Sanctuary of dreams without a dreamer. There are no more lessons waiting in the darkness now, no further strategies to memorize or human patterns to decode. The concepts we have carried together through this long night, power, observation, silence, shadow, these words lose their sharp edges, blurring into soft shapes that drift like autumn leaves across still water, each one touching the surface and disappearing without sound, without meaning, without the need for understanding. Robert Greene's voice, which guided us through centuries of ambition and ancient behavioral patterns, fades now into the background hum of existence, becoming indistinguishable from your own breathing, from the distant sound that might be traffic or might be ocean waves, from the house settling around you like the earth itself exhaling. Imagine yourself walking down a long corridor lined with heavy doors, each one carved with words that once seemed urgent. The air smells of rain on ancient stone. One by one we close these doors. The door marked "Tomorrow's Obligations" swings shut with a soft click. That conversation you replayed closes with a gentle thud. Whether they understand you disappears into shadow. The person you should have become evaporates like morning mist. Each closure releases you from another reason to remain awake, another tether to the waking world that no longer requires your vigilance. At the corridor's end stands an ancient hall where candles flicker along stone walls, each flame a thought, each thought a small, precise burning. Watch now as these lights are gently extinguished, not with violence, not with wind, but with time's patient fingers. One candle dims, then another, then another. The embarrassing moment from yesterday dissolves into smoke. The unfinished task becomes shadow. The worry about next week fades to nothing. The hall grows dimmer with each extinguished flame, the walls themselves beginning to blur, the distinction between walking and floating becoming meaningless. There is a loose thread hanging from the tapestry of your day, the thread of needing to understand, the thread of staying alert. An invisible hand begins to pull this thread. Slowly, steadily, the knot of tension in your chest loosens. The tight weave of thoughts slackens. The intricate patterns of who you are and what you must do come undone, not with violence but with graceful surrender. The tapestry unravels into soft, formless silk pooling on the floor, purposeless and beautiful. Language itself grows loose now. Sentences become longer, more fluid, like water finding its level. Words stop behaving like separate stones and become a continuous current, flowing and bending. Meaning grows soft around the edges. You are no longer required to follow every phrase. Understanding can rest, comprehension can close its eyes. One last candle remains, its flame barely taller than a whisper. It does not resist. It trembles once, glows softly, then surrenders. The smoke rises in a thin ribbon, curling, disappearing into the vast, tender dark where nothing is asked of you anymore. The corridor stretches longer now, longer than memory, each step taking you deeper into a place where time moves differently, where the walls fade and thoughts arrive like echoes, softer with each repetition, slower, until they are whispers, then breath, then memory of breath, then nothing but profound silence, waiting underneath everything for you to stop thinking, stop being anyone, and simply dissolve into the wordless, nameless infinite. Dark, drifting, deeper, deeper, into sleep, sleep, sleep.